here are 5 signs that you are training like a wimp. Now, I thought about using other terms apart from wimp.
Pussy.
But, I don't want to be too mean, so let's just go with wimp. But let's jump right into it. Sign number 1 is that you are not getting any bar speed slowdown. So when you're doing a set, you're not getting those slow, grindy reps. You're not getting those 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 second concentrics that are actually indicative of being close to failure. Sometimes I see someone, whether it's like 2 seconds, 2 seconds, 2 seconds, 2.5 seconds, then they rack the bar. And they say, oh yeah, I was, that was RPE 9. It wasn't. It probably wasn't. There are some exceptions, something like a close grip bench press. Failure might sneak up on you, but more often than not, this is just cope. Pure cope. It's not based. It's very cringe.
How do you do, fellow kids?
What?
And at least 95% of the time I see this, people are just giving up. They're just giving up. If you actually had something on the line, $1 million on the line for every rep you get, or, your family is held hostage or some other messed up situation, you would have gotten another rep. Probably 2 more reps, 3 reps, 5 reps, 10 reps. I've seen people who are like, yeah, I do high intensity training. Yeah, but you are like 10 reps away from failure. You're not even doing anything. You haven't actually stimulated the muscle to grow, because why would it? And then they'll say something like, but bro, I'm fast twitch. Oh, you got a biopsy? Well, no, I didn't get a biopsy. Okay, so how do you know you're fast twitch? Well, I lack the ability to grind. Well, have you tried? Have you actually genuinely trained till you fail? And not just where it's like, oh, 1, 2, I failed. No, like actually giving it your all. Most people don't do that. Even when most people train to failure, it wasn't actual failure. It was just them failing because they gave up. Not always, but it's super, super common. Learn to struggle against a weight. Unless you have just freakish genetics, you are going to need to really attack a set in order to get something out of it and to build the physique you want. Here's another test. If I can't tell the difference between your working sets and your warm-ups, you have an effort problem. Another thing people will say is that, oh, if I did 1 more rep, my technique would have broken down. Well, 2 things. First, don't let your technique break down.
If you're homeless, just buy a house.
You can keep strict technique if you want and still be trending close to failure, but it will slow down. Or you can actually let your technique go slightly in order to go beyond failure on some lifts. Not squats, not deadlifts, but on something like a cable lateral raise or a dumbbell lateral raise, or a rear delt raise where your chest is supported, you can use a little bit of oomph, a little bit of momentum in order to prolong the set. And I think a lot of people are just getting almost nothing out of these isolations because they are simply stopping when they hit technical failure. Finally, if I'm coaching someone and I get a video, I look at their face. I look at their intention, I look at their focus before the set. During the set, are they actually locked in? If you're looking around and stuff during the set, you're probably not training with a lot of effort. You need to be absolutely locked in and focusing on nothing else but the set. And during those last few reps, yeah, you might be straining a little bit. Your face might contort. Very few people can actually give a truly 100% effort without looking like it. Number 2, you have an optimal exercise selection. Now, I am certainly not entirely opposed to these movements. In fact, I'll do a whole video on ones that I like. I think there is a lot of value here, and it's certainly not all bad, especially when you are more advanced. But if your program is entirely these optimal exercises and you're a beginner and you're like, I don't back squat because, it's not optimal for the quads. I don't do RDLs because it's not optimal for blah, blah, blah. That is probably a sign that you're a wimp. You're going for the easier exercises, and these optimal exercises are usually easier. They are simply easier. And that is part of the draw when you're more advanced, but when you're a beginner, always going for these movements, is probably a sign that you're just going for the easy way out. And I've talked to beginners who are very, very underdeveloped, to put it charitably, and they don't do any of the big basic compound movements, no barbells, no dumbbells, everything is super, super isolated, super, super strict, and they think that this is going to get them big. It doesn't seem to work very well. You can add these on top of the basic training, and I think that can work really, really well, but do it later. Number 3, keeping reps in reserve on safer isolation or machine type movements. So RPE, or reps in reserve, originated from powerlifting training. So barbell squat, barbell bench, barbell deadlift. These are all big movements, compound movements, heavily loaded, very, very taxing, and very, very fatiguing. So you have to actually be able to manage your fatigue, because most powerlifters are not going to be able to max out on a very, very regular basis, especially if they're not swapping the movements. So for them, keeping reps in reserve makes a lot of sense. A big part of the reason they use accessories partly is for weak point correction, but partly it's just because you can't really necessarily train to failure on barbell, squat, bench, dead without having repercussions or ramifications for most people. So they use accessories to be able to train closer to failure, to be able to build muscle, and to be able to use those in place of going to failure on these big compounds. Now, if you are using reps in reserve for these smaller movements, you're kind of applying the wrong tool for the job in most cases. And sometimes people will cite literature saying that, oh, training to failure takes longer to recover. Oh, look at the elevated cytokine levels. Oh, inflammation. Blah, 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 blah. Well, yes, these studies are on people who have quite possibly never trained to failure in their lives. So they're just normies. They've never really given an all-out effort. Then they go to the lab, they have people yelling at them, and this group trains to failure, this group doesn't train to failure. Well, yeah, they're giving a novel effort. They're doing something they've never done before, and so yes, it's going to take longer for them to recover in the short term. But it's something that you can absolutely adapt to in the long term. So I've trained to failure. Every workout, I've done something to failure. Not everything, but I've done at least something. Could be a leg extension, could be a leg curl, could be a cable lateral raise, could be a chest fly. I've done something to failure every single workout for the past 8 years. I don't think I've ever had a single workout where everything used reps in reserve. Now, I might use reps in reserve on some things occasionally, but the majority of my stuff is either to failure or 0 reps in reserve. And if you apply a powerlifting mindset to bodybuilding, you're probably going to be underdoing it, because you don't need to manage fatigue as much, because the exercise selection already does that. If you apply a bodybuilding mindset to powerlifting, you're probably going to be very, very unhappy and very, very injured. By the way, thank you to Boostcamp for sponsoring this video. They are the one and only sponsors of the channel. I actually have 2 programs up on the Boostcamp app. You can check them out. There is Ravage and Rampage. Rampage is a 3-day per week full body hypertrophy focused split. And then Ravage is the plan that I have been doing over the past 1.5 years or so. It is 6-day per week, so not really beginner friendly. This is also hypertrophy focused, so check them out. I will link them in the description if you want to peruse the app. Of course, you can also use the app to track your progress. It's super easy to use, very, very intuitive, and both functions are completely free. Number 4, using SFR, or stimulus to fatigue ratio, when not needed. So most people, they don't need to worry about fatigue. The vast majority of people are not even capable of generating very much fatigue at all, let alone enough to impede progress. For most people, giving them more stimulus and also more fatigue, even if that ratio is worse, they will see better progress, because the vast majority of people are simply not bumping up against their recovery threshold. Now, if you're a professional athlete, if you're doing a lot of volume, if you're very, very strong, if you are capable of actually draining yourself because you know how to push yourself, SFR might be relevant. But I can't tell you how many beginners are like, yeah, don't do this. Deadlifts, SFR bad. Well, you deadlift 2 plates. It doesn't matter. And fatigue is a part of training. You have to accept that. It's not the goal. You're not trying to get fatigued. And I agree that it is absolutely a bad thing. But even worse is trying to avoid all fatigue or trying to minimize the amount of fatigue that you're getting. That will absolutely limit your progress because to a certain extent, stimulus and fatigue go hand in hand. You should try to optimize that ratio, but you also have to realize the ratio can only get so good. And I haven't been completely fresh for a session in a very, very long time. I go into a lot of sessions with fatigue. I never feel completely crushed, but I never feel completely fresh either. I try to balance those. If I'm too far in either direction, it means I'm either underdoing things or overdoing things. I forgot which way I pointed. If it's wrong, just flip them. I get DMs. My DMs are a mess. They're an absolute mess. It's just, if my responses are really, really brief, really, really short, I'm sorry, it's really, really tough to keep up. I get like 80 to 100 DMs a day. Not even exaggerating, it's excessive at points. But I get DMs from people who are like, they see my training and they're like, bro, aren't you tired? And to me, I'm like, I'm training hard. I have high aspirations. Of course I'm going to be tired at some point. The idea that you can completely minimize fatigue or get rid of fatigue or you're always going to feel 100%, to me, that is a sure sign that someone is going to go absolutely nowhere. If you're training for health or just enjoyment or your mental health or something like that, most of this stuff is not going to apply. Like you can keep 5 reps on reserve and, lifting is still going to be useful for your health. And if you don't have high aspirations, none of this really applies. Number 5, you train with super low volume. So high intensity training can be a little bit of a cult, to put it mildly. But if you think that you can't do more than 1 set, like 1 set, that's all it takes, doing more than 1 set, it means people are lazy if they do more than 1 set, because it means that they weren't working as hard for their sets. And so I am so hardcore because I only do 1 set. Ha ha ha. Well, maybe. If it's something like a deadlift, 1 set can absolutely go a long way. But if you tell me you're doing, chest supported rows, you finish your 1 set to failure, and, oh man, if I did a 2nd set, that's overtraining. Or if I did a 2nd set, that means that the 1st set wasn't that hard. Yeah, bullshit. And the reality is you can build up your work capacity. You can build up your recovery capacity, and you can actually, I know, shocking, benefit from a 2nd set, even a 3rd set, perhaps even a 4th and a 5th and a 6th set on some movements. You're going to have to play it by ear, but if you are absolutely just capping yourself at 1 set, that could be a sign you are training like a wimp. Sure, some very, very advanced, very, very developed lifters, they do 1 set and they benefit from that and it seems to work for them. But a few things here. First, genetics are absolutely a factor here. Perhaps they are very, very sensitive to training. 2, they can generate a lot of fatigue, so they might genuinely only be able to do 1 set. But if you're bench pressing 135 and you're like, well, I don't want to get overly fatigued, wimp. Furthermore, a lot of these guys are doing their warm-ups suspiciously high to the point where they're kind of blending into the working sets and it's not really clear what is what, and it's actually a lot more work than you think. It's not just like singles up to the working weight. No, they're doing like pretty hard sets of 10 or 15 that most people would consider to be working sets. I've also heard numerous stories of them sneaking off in the middle of the night to get in more training.
You have committed crimes against Skyrim and her people. What say you in your defense? Skyrim has no use for your kind.
Which they didn't really say to their fans because it's a little bit of a cult. It's a cult. And there is a little bit of a trade-off between effort per set and the number of sets you do. I do think that there's no way to replicate the same level of intensity and effort for 2 sets compared to 1 set, especially on some movements. Like an all-out set of RDLs compared to 2 sets of RDLs, there might be a discrepancy there. But the idea that you can't just give like a very, very good effort for 2 sets or even 3 sets, that is probably a sign of mental weakness for most people rather than some kind of inherent physiological thing where you just can't perform for more than one set. And the reality is, if I do 5 sets on a movement, all of those sets are harder than most people would do 1 set. So you can train your ability to train hard. Don't think that this is fixed or static or genetic or anything like that. You can get better at getting better. And the reality is, more than any supplement, more than any system, more than any protocol, more than anything that someone is going to try to sell you in the fitness industry, just training hard is going to be the one thing that you can change to actually supercharge your results. That being said, if you like this video, definitely check out my books, because knowing what to do is also still a factor. I'm never going to discount training hard or say that, knowledge is more important than pushing yourself, but it certainly can help. So definitely check those out. I will link them in a pinned comment down below. Thank you so much for the support, and thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.